From the moment she stepped onto the America's Got Talent stage, the entire room felt it, an energy so familiar, so haunting, so deeply human that people leaned forward without even realizing it. The young woman, slender and soft-spoken, stood beneath the bright lights with her hands clasped tightly together. Her hair fell in loose waves, partially hiding her face. The judges watched her with curiosity. Not yet knowing who she was, the audience whispered among themselves, sensing something unusual, but no one expected the truth that would spill into the air only moments later. "My name is Mariah Jackson," she said quietly. A hush washed over the room. "Yes, Michael Jackson is my father." Gasps rippled through the audience like a wave across the Pacific. But there was no glamour in her voice, no attempt to write on a legacy, only a tremor of vulnerability, as if saying her own name out loud required more courage than her entire appearance. People stared, stunned not because of fame, but because she looked nothing like someone who grew up in privilege. Her clothes were simple, her sneakers slightly worn, and her voice carried the soft fatigue of someone who had lived more life than her years should hold. What the world didn't know, what even she struggled to accept, was that she had spent most of her life hiding from her father's shadow. Losing him so early had created a wound that fame never soothed, and expectations from the world only deepened it. Tonight wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about freeing herself. She stepped into the center of the stage, took a breath so shaky it was almost audible, and nodded to the pianist. A single chord filled the studio, then another. And then her voice, soft at first, like a fragile bird testing its wings, she sang Smile, her father's favorite song. Something indescribable happened. Her voice wasn't a copy of Michael Jackson's, it wasn't even close. But the emotion, raw, trembling, unfiltered, hit the room with the same honesty that made him beloved. There was innocence in her tone, but also a lifetime of unspoken grief, love, and longing. The first verse brought tears to the eyes of audience members who hadn't cried in years. Even Simon Cowell, who prided himself on remaining composed, blinked twice and leaned his chin on his hand, quietly studying her. At the second verse, her voice cracked not from lack of control, but from overwhelming emotion. She paused, covered her mouth, and looked down as if embarrassed. For a moment, the audience thought she might break down completely. Instead, something unexpected happened. A young boy in the front row, maybe 7, maybe 8, stood up and whispered, "You can do it." His voice was small, but the microphone caught it, sending the words echoing across the studio. Mariah looked up, startled. The boy sat there wearing a bright red shirt with a white sequined glove. Printed on it, a tribute to the man she missed every single day. She smiled at him, her eyes wet, and whispered back, "Thank you." The pianist resumed playing gently, almost as if giving her space to breathe. And then Mariah began again, stronger, steadier, her voice carried by the kindness of a child she had never met. When she reached the final lines, she didn't just sing them, she lived them. The grief in her voice transformed into gratitude, the longing turned into strength. She closed her eyes and held the last note longer than anyone thought possible, filling the room with something bigger than music hope. Silence followed, then the room exploded. People rose to their feet. Thunderous applause rattled the walls. Some held their hearts. Others wiped tears as if embarrassed by their own emotions. The little boy who had encouraged her stood on his seat clapping as wildly as his small hands allowed. When the applause finally softened, Simon was the first to speak. "That," he said, fighting to steady his voice, "was not a performance. That was healing. For you and for us." Mariah lowered her head, touched by the sincerity. "I just wanted to honor him," she said. "But I also wanted to find myself." Before any of the other judges could offer their praise, Heidi leaned forward. "Your father moved the world," she said gently. "But tonight, you moved us. Not because of your name, because of your heart." The crowd murmured in agreement, many nodding vigorously. Then came the moment no one saw coming. Sofia Vergara wiped her eyes, leaned across the table, and said, "I think your father would be incredibly proud of you. And I think the world needs to hear your voice, your story, not just for who he was, but for who you are becoming." And with that, she slammed the golden buzzer. Confetti burst overhead like a storm of gold, raining down in shimmering spirals. Mariah covered her mouth, overwhelmed. The audience roared, and the boy in the red shirt jumped up and down, cheering louder than anyone. Crew members backstage pressed their hands to their hearts, unable to contain their emotion. But just when the cameras were about to fade, something remarkable happened, something unscripted, unexpected, and profoundly human. Mariah stepped off the stage and walked straight toward the little boy who had spoken up at her most vulnerable moment. She knelt in front of him, her eyes red but glowing with gratitude. "You helped me finish," she said softly. The boy shrugged with innocence only children possess. "My mom says everyone needs someone to cheer for them." His mother, standing beside him, nodded shyly, clearly overwhelmed. Mariah hugged the boy, not a brief hug for show but a long, sincere, grounding embrace. When she pulled away, the boy looked confused as she pressed her father's famous silver pendant into his hand. "Are you sure?" he asked, stunned. "Yeah," she said, smiling through tears. "I think he'd want you to have it." The boy froze, unable to comprehend the magnitude of the gesture. His mother covered her mouth, crying silently. Cameras captured the moment, but even without them, the emotion was undeniable, a legacy being passed, not through fame but through kindness. In that instant, the studio transformed. The moment wasn't about celebrity, competition, or a spectacle. It was about connection, one human lifting another when they needed it most. When Mariah walked back onto the stage, the judges stood one more time, not for her voice, but for the act of generosity they had just witnessed. Simon looked genuinely moved. "You just changed that boy's life," he said, "and I think you changed ours too." Mariah shook her head gently. "He changed mine first." Her words echoed through the room, landing deep in the hearts of everyone who heard them. Weeks later, as her performance spread across America, people talked about her voice, yes, but more than that. They talked about her kindness. They talked about the moment she knelt before a little boy and handed him a piece of history. They talked about how a simple act of encouragement gave her the strength to finish a song she had been afraid to sing her whole life. And they talked about the message she carried with her long after the golden buzzer confetti settled. You don't need a legend's shadow to shine. You only need courage, a good heart, and someone who believes in you, even if it's a stranger in the front row. In the end, Mariah didn't just honor her father. She honored what he stood for: love, connection, and the quiet power of humanity. Her tribute wasn't just emotional. It was transformative, a reminder to America and to the world that miracles don't always come from stages or spotlights. Sometimes they come from ordinary people choosing compassion at exactly the right moment. And that was the night Michael Jackson's daughter didn't just shock America. She healed it one note, one tear, and one act of kindness at a time.